Hello and welcome back to Fantasy Wargaming. Life is cruel in a number of ways. Today we're going to be looking back at my last two tournaments that I've been to. I've taken Kruleboyz and I want to reassess Kruleboyz as a faction in light of the changes from the Battlescroll and take a look at where my mind is at in terms of the faction and what are my next steps. But before we get to that, I think it is worth first answering, where the hell have I been? Because this has been, at least several months since I've last made a video. And they are going to be excuses, I won't deny, but I think that they are justifiable excuses. The first of which has been time. I found myself very pressed for time in the past few months, and I've had to reallocate my energy accordingly. I've had a number of family emergencies, primarily health-based emergencies. Not myself, but a close member of my immediate family that kind of pulled me in different directions and weighed heavily on my time. And as a result, I basically had to cut some elements of my life out temporarily until I could kind of find some space to breathe. Now, I wouldn't say that I'm completely out the other end of this, but I am trying to now carve out a little bit of time each week to maybe put out one video a week is my tentative goal here as I try and ramp back up into this channel. But you didn't come here to hear me feel sorry for myself. You came for the Kruleboyz content, clearly, based off of everyone's Twitter interactions with me. So, let's talk Kruleboyz. What's changed in the recent Galley Vet Battlescroll, for those of you who don't have your finger on the pulse of the Stinky Boys changes? Well, I mean, primarily it comes in two forms. It's the first of which is that shamans can now multitask, and what I mean by that is they can now cast their spell as well as give out a poison or an elixir. And what that means in practice is that the value has gone up considerably because suddenly one of the best spell laws in the game we have much greater access to without taking Gobsprak. So Nasty Hex, Choking Mists, Summon Boggy Mists, Black Pit, Sneaky Miasma, Mystic Shield as well. Mystic Shield is great. It lets you do some funky things like Mystic Shield a unit and give it an elixir to give it a +2 save before all out defense, which when you put it on certain units can actually make you capable of putting out a save stack in tank, which was not something I was expecting to be saying about Kruleboyz, but it is very limited, and I'll explain in a second. In addition to that change, there have been some points drops on many key pieces, that being the monsters. So that's Gobby, that's the Sludge Raker, that's the Kill Boss and Vulture, and it's Derek, the named Sludge Raker, being the notable ones here. Gut Rippers received a 20 points drop, which took them from 180 points to 160. After playing over a dozen or so games with them, I would not describe the unit as great. I wouldn't even describe the unit as good. However, it is still a much welcome change because if you're running Grinning Blades, you have to run at least 2 units of 10, which means that this is a 40 points shave, and every point drop counts here. The most notable, I think, the most surprising was the Nash Tooth dropped to 150. 150 for 10 wounds on a free up save that can move 10 inches. That's actually quite an interesting little boost to the faction because suddenly we have a quite points efficient. I mean, I'll pay 15 points for a free up save, 15 points per wound on a free up save when we have access to save stacking. They were 170 before. And they were still okay then, but I wasn't taking them primarily because then they're a commander, not a sub-commander, because they are 10 wounds. And I was trying to run like double Warlord or Warlord Battle Regiment. I was trying to basically mitigate how many commanders I brought to my list as a element of my list building requirements, which was to try and get to, between 2 and 5 drops. And as soon as you add a third, fourth, fifth commander, obviously you have to throw those plans out the window. I'll speak on the Nashtooth in more detail, but that's the broad overview of what actually changed for the faction. As for its impact on how the army plays, Gobsprak's value, strangely enough, has gone down a little bit in my estimation. The reason for that is quite simply, you can get your spellcasts now from the shamans. You typically want to run at least 2 shamans. And now Gobsprak's in this place where, yes, he knows the whole spell lore. Yes, you can get a rerollable redeploy. But you could just take the generic vulture that's on a 4-up save, is 40 points cheaper. You can give him Arcane Tome if you want to stick Nasty Hex on him. And he hits a little bit harder. And you can do the double issue of a command. It's marginal, but those 40 points you shave off there, you add it to the 40 points you save off your Gut Rippers, and you can really start to, you can put in an additional meaningful unit into your army, basically. Space for more bodies and slightly more list building routes are available now as a result of those changes. So suddenly, Nashtooth spam is a meaningful decision that you can make, because you could run like 4 Nashtooths, and that would cost you 600 points, and you still got loads for the rest of your army. You could run double Sludge Raker, because they've I believe 30 points cheaper now, and that's 60 points you've saved effectively. 100 if you count the 2 units of Gut Rippers, and you can see now why I keep saying you can basically put 1 more unit in. And as you will understand when you make your own lists for any army that you play, oftentimes you find yourself having to shuffle when you get to that last unit that you want to put in, because you're like 10 points over, 20 points over. This gives us that flexibility to either, keep a list as it is and add an endless spell, maybe add another unit of Hobgrots, or completely change our construction by maybe swapping a Mybrute for a Nashtooth, which saves you 30 points, and you add that to your discount that you've received from the points drops, and suddenly it's like, oh, I can add 3 more Bolt Boys, or I could add a 3rd Shaman, or I can upgrade this Vulture to a Sludge Raker, that sort of thing. That said, it still doesn't fix our high drop issues. We are naturally going to be a high drop, because I don't think the army functions well at all if you go for a 1-drop list and you're not taking an Incarnate. The reason for that is quite simply many of our best units are commanders. The Vulture is very good now for its cost. The Sludge Raker is obviously exceptional for anyone who's ever played against one. Those things can slap. The Nashtooth is 10 wounds. It's a commander. And Gobsprak's a commander. And yes, we could just go like Shaman, Sludge Raker. And then it's like, yeah, you've got all the points in the world, but what are you going to spend them on? The rest of our roster is so thin. It's like, oh, we couldn't take a Mybrute. That's a commander. I guess we could spam Gut Rippers. Oh, but they're bad. We could spam Bolt Boys. Yes, and that would make us very good against the melee armies, but Bolt Boy spam doesn't actually make the army any better on the top tables, because it still has its Achilles heel, which we're going to get to. You could take more Hobgrots, you could take allies, but you get what I'm saying here. Basically, the roster isn't deep enough in terms of options where we can just go, I'm only going to take 1 commander. That said, we can be high drop and still present a tougher front line, because of the Nashtooths now being quite a interesting, tough element that we can throw into our list. So let's have a look at an example list, and what I mean by that is I'm going to show you the list that I took to War in the Heartlands and talk about it. And this was a list tweaked that I also took to Carnage Teams a few weeks back. I had to, basically it's the same list, I just had to remove the Battle Regiment and Bounty Hunters because of the way that list construction worked in Carnage Teams. So to give you the rundown of my of this list and my line of thinking post Battlescroll, let's first start by discussing the grand strategy. The grand strategy has been huge when playing Kruleboyz post Battlescroll. A piece neatly clicked into place, which is the Vulture is 220. He's our general. He's got a 14-inch move, and we give him faster. So he's got a once per game hero phase move for an additional 14 inches. Which means that even before a run roll, even before charge, even before the potential of sneaky miasma, I could move him 28 inches, which is more than enough to get into my opponent's territory. For those not familiar with War, War as a grand strategy requires you to have one of your battle line units or your general in your opponent's territory at the end of the battle. That's the only requirement. So as long as we play defensively with the Vulture, we don't kill him. We have a fairly easy path to our grand strategy. Or we could just score it with our Hogrots. And quite simply, like, that's been huge, because one of the problems I'd had with Kruleboyz has been scoring their grand strategy. Because you got no mercy for the weak, but some armies, they just spam lots of durable battle line. And it's not like, let's say it's, you know, an 8 dragon list. You're not going to kill all 8 dragons. You've lost your grand strategy already. Whereas this, you've got a bit of tactical play to it. The other main change from what I've been running before is that there's now an inclusion of 2 Nash Juice. The way that I was using these Nash Juices, I would put one in each of my flanks, and they could work very well as independent operators, either it being to pin a unit on its corner to make it difficult for them to come forward, and be annoying to shift because I could save stack them, and they're naturally quite durable, or they contributed another unit that could function very well on my Kruleboyz War turn. So for those not familiar, the Kruleboyz War is a once per game ability when my general fights, where I can go, right, my general fights, and then I can pick 2 more units wholly within 18 inches of that general, which, considering the Vulture is on a big pie plate, that's a huge radius. And they can fight one after the other. So it's like a once per game mega charged lightning reflexes. So between the Vulture, the 2 Nash Juice, and the Slidraker, I had much more viable Kruleboyz War targets, which meant my Kruleboyz War turn was more effective. Some of my earlier lists, one of the problems that I often found myself with is that I didn't actually have 3 units even in combat that could do anything meaningful. Like, I was declaring a Kruleboyz War and having a Shaman fight or my Boltboyz fight, which isn't a meaningful impact, and you want to try and maximize that value when you're running such a surgical knife list like Kruleboyz. 2 Shamans, one with Sneaky Miasma, one with Choking Mist. The Slidraker has Nasty Hex, which means I've got access to all 3 of the best spells in the spell lore. I don't have Black Pit, but Black Pit isn't very good in the metagame right now. And then my battle line is 10 Gut Rippers, 10 Gut Rippers, Hogrots. My Carnage Teams list actually made my second unit Hogrots battle line as well. I think if I were to run this in singles, I would just straight up make all of the Hogrots battle line and just accept that No Mercy for the Wicked is going to be difficult. The reason I would make that change is because of my grand strategy, to make it a little bit easier, as well as make Barge Through, make the possibility of scoring a bonus point with Barge Through more viable, because you'd be surprised how often your opponent will just leave that last model in the unit of the Hogwarts Slitters alive, and then you just run into their far corner to score your grand strategy, or Barge Through, obviously. And then 2x6 units of Boltboyz. And it was still a castle army, but now it was a castle army where I could go like Gut Rippers, Nash Doof on the sides. My inner castle has the 2 units of Boltboyz and the Slidraker. Right in the back, I've got my Vulture, who was like a backboard bully piece. He would be there to respond to my opponent's moves. And then 2 units of Screens of Hogrots right at the front. Oftentimes, one of them would get super sneaky just to tag a point pre-game. So if my opponent wants to give me first turn, I've already got the point. I could do against the odds, score it easily, or if they went second, if they forced me to go second and they wanted to go first, let's say for example they have like an Alpha Strike army that thinks that they can get in on me, I can pre-game move the Hobgrots up onto the point, tag it, use Proving Ground on that objective. The Hobgrots can die, doesn't matter. I'm holding the point because oftentimes those lists don't actually have a Galley Vet unit that could come in and contest it, which is a really nice way of getting ahead on points of the game. I did that a number of times over Carnage teams and War in the Heartlands. As for its impact, what lessons I've learned, how the tournaments went, I went 3-2 at War in Heartlands, losing to Dan Bradshaw, who was the eventual, I think he came second place, and he was playing Helon, Lumineth Realm Lords with Teclis, 40 Sentinels, 2 units of Wind Chargers, a Cathalar, Spell Portal, Rune of Petrification. Basically, the thing that did me in was the AoE Mortal Wounds from Rune of Petrification, as well as Teclis' War Scroll spell. Now, how did he manage this, considering the line of sight thing? Well, he can measure visibility from the spell portal, which is huge because he can just put the spell portal in range and then cast the AoE Mortal Wound bomb from Teclis through the spell portal, which basically massively increases its range and makes my subfaction ability irrelevant. And then Cathalar, he would teleport the Cathalar and then use the Deep Thinker's ability of the Cathalar to auto-cast the Rune of Petrification on the 9. And he tagged most of my castle with both the Rune of Petrification and... I've forgotten the name of the spell. I think it's Searing Rays of Light, something like that. And he was killing the shamans, killing the bolt boys, forcing battle shocks and everything, which I could mitigate somewhat. But basically, he pulled me apart. It was just a bad matchup because turns out castle shooting armies where you got fragile units of bolt boys, they really hate AoE Mortal Wounds because there's only 12 wounds in a 6-man bolt boy unit, and you can quite quickly chew through that with Rays of Searing Light and Rune of Pet. And then my game 5 was against the lovely Owen Jackson. So I played against a member of Team England and then immediately played against a member of Team Wales. And would you believe it, he was running Reign of Stars, which is sort of a meme list that became real because it's very good. He was running Slan, he was running Comet, Everblaze Comet. He was running Stardrake for the +1 to cast with Master Magic rerollable so he can cast the Comet consistently. He was running Celestant Prime to do the AoE point, does a radius and mortal wounds from a point. And then he was running like Fulminators, Libs, and then a cheeky unit of the Far Striders, one of the Underworld's warbands, just for, it's got a teleport so we could cap points with it. And again, the combination of Comet, Slan's War Scroll spell, what's it called? Celestial Deliverance, I want to say it's called, and the Celestant Prime, he just did the exact same thing that Dan Bradshaw did. So I play against two lists that are very, very good against my style of list. My other 3 games, I beat Feck, I beat a Team Scotland, I think he was a vice captain, who was playing Daughters of Cain, like Marathi and the Bow Snakes, crushed that list. And I played against Beast of Chaos, Zangor Enlightened spam list, and I crushed that. So overall from that tournament, I did really well because I played against 2, high impact metagame lists in the Beast of Chaos and Daughters of Cain, and won them both quite comfortably. And I was really happy to beat a member of a national team, especially a vice captain. It was a really, really good game. But then I just really struggled against those AoE mortal wound spam sort of lists. So what were the lessons? What were the takeaways after that tournament and the following one? Carnage teams, I'll touch on much more briefly. I went 2-3, having been bussed 3 times. The losses were to a Nighthaunt list. Sorry, I got bussed twice, and then one was bad luck. My losses were against Fly Spam Nurgle, where the only reason I got a minor loss, I got 8 points to his 12. The only reason I didn't win is because I failed a 4-inch charge on a reroll. That was a crusher. I played against the Delightful Speckles, playing Nighthaunt. He made a 10-inch charge, 11-inch charge, 10-inch charge, and rolled a 5-up with Alinda to shut off my Unleash Hell with my Bolt Boys to have an amazing turn 1. Made all my stuff fight last and just basically delivered a crippling blow turn 1. It is what it is. My last game, I played against Beast of Chaos, Dragon Ogre, Zango, Enlightened Spam, and that was a good clean game. And he just beat me. He just wore me down. He played a really good game. He plays Kruleboyz himself, so he knew what to look out for, and it was good and close. I think I lost by 6 points in the end, but if a couple of dice rolls went differently, a priority roll, I would have scored my grand strat and scored more points last turn, and I could have forced a draw, minor loss. And then I beat Nighthaunt, or absolutely crushed another Nighthaunt list, and I beat a Skaven list because it wasn't running Storm Fiends. And if Skaven isn't running Storm Fiends, I'm not that worried. Anyway, let's look at Kruleboyz in general. You know, what have I taken away from that? So, because we can include more stuff, it's better because we can make our good matchups even better. So, Flesh Eater Courts, Big War, OBR, all these fair melee armies, we get much better because we can still include that core of 12 Bolt Boys and have more meat in front of them to protect them. So we have stronger green matchups. And the added mobility element from including 2 Gnash Tooths or more, or you could do double Vulture, that sort of thing. There's multiple ways to get access to mobility. It allows us to place certain battle plans where things are spread out, like Silk Steel Nests, a little bit better. It turns out red matchups to orange. So my loss to the Beast of Chaos lists at Team Carnage, that was on Silk Steel Nest. And I really struggled on that. If it had been like a smaller number of objectives battle plan, I would have had a better chance. But whereas before it was basically an auto lose to play like Silk Steel, now it's more of an orange rather than a red because the 2 Gnash Tooths and the Vulture gives me a little bit of objective play. Now the argument for whether they're still bad, we still struggle against enemies that can bypass a line of sight protection. So as I talked about before, Dan Bradshaw's Lumineth or Owen Jackson's Reign of Stars list, both of those had the ability to ignore line of sight and do long range mortal wounds. So you could pick apart the Shamans, pick apart the Bolt Boys, and then the whole house of cards collapses. Kruleboyz still absolutely hate getting punched in the mouth. So if you've got hyper aggressive army that's capable of making turn 1 charges and piling round, like for example, the Stonehorn in the new Ogre's book can now charge and then do the Monstrous Rampage to kind of drift 3d6 to kind of get behind the screen. That's real bad news for what Kruleboyz are trying to do. And as soon as you get into the inner castle, things start falling apart quite rapidly. And then AoE Mortal Wound lists and spellcasting in general are still no bueno, still very bad for us, no good. So we can cast more spells now because the Shamans can cast spells and give out buffs. However, if they're running Techless, if they're running Croak, if they're running Thankwo, they can still just deny those spells, and the army functions a lot poorer when those spells get denied. And it certainly doesn't help that all these spells are casting value 6 or 7, and we have no native bonuses to cast. So sometimes you just don't get your spells off, and that can go really poorly. So there's no consistency there. So what's the plan? What are we doing? What are we going to do going forward? It's stop pushing shit uphill. I spoke to Dan Bradshaw. I spoke to Owen Jackson. I spoke to Scotland. I've forgotten his name. I think he's called Nick. No, Scott. His name's Scott. Now I'm doubting myself. And he was saying, well, they were basically saying you didn't make mistakes. You played well. You were just playing a poor army. I had a comment from Hellstorm Mikey. Shout out to you. When we played, he was playing these fly spam list at Teams Carnage. And at one point in the game, he turned to a teammate and he laughed and said, "I'm going to fucking lose to Kruleboyz." And he said it in sort of like a joking, derogatory manner. But it speaks to the perception of Kruleboyz as an army, which is they just don't get respect because, well, they can crumple quite easily. They can either win really, really well, or if things don't go well, you don't get your 7 CV spells off. It goes really, really poorly. I was actually told at one point that I was outplaying them, and yet I was still really struggling because of the strength of my war scrolls. So I want to play an army where my wins are less hard fought. I know I'm a very good player. I know I'm capable of tournament success. I've gone 4-1 before with Big War, and if my intent is realistically to actually win a tournament, which is what I want to do in the next year, I need to keep my energy levels high. I need to not exhaust myself on day one trying to find paths to victory against inferior armies by trying to find a path with my cobbled together Kruleboyz list. And for that, the War Scrolls need to do some heavy lifting. I need to have wins where I can make a couple of high-level decisions and win the game through making the correct ones and letting the War Scrolls do the work, rather than having to simply outplay my opponent, which sometimes is not possible when you're coming up against national players. Who, spoiler alert, it may not be the case in America, but in the UK, because everything's so condensed and everyone's so close together, the chances of playing against a national player, a national squad member for England, Scotland, Wales, really high. So I need to give myself the best possible chance to succeed. And ideally, I also want to play an army that doesn't fall apart if I make a minor mistake. Day 2, especially, I start to slip a little bit as I start to get fatigued. And I think it's compounded by what I was saying earlier about having to push that shit uphill, which is mentally draining. So I want an army where if I make minor mistakes, I don't just lose the game on the spot, which was often the case with Kruleboyz. Now, drum roll. You should know what this is if you've been following me on Twitter, but for those of you who follow me from YouTube, I ended up picking Days to Darkness, Slaves of Darkness. The reason for that is pretty simple. It's a really deep book, the new one that's coming out. There's a lot of interesting lists that you can make. They're primarily going to be melee armies. There is a spellcasting list that you can make that's probably going to be very good, but there's enough of a toolbox element and enough breadth of choice that I can take them to tournaments. I can have strong war scrolls like the Chosen, Splintered Fang, Chaos Knights, Chaos Warriors, take me to victory. And when I need to make tweaks, I can make tweaks, I can iterate, I can build on in a way that I couldn't do with Kruleboyz, because just quite simply the roster wasn't deep enough. My initial list that I'm going to be running early next year is based off of what Phil Marshall, the top ranked player for Slaves of Darkness, I believe he's world champion at the moment. Like, the dude has he got flown out to New Mexico for a Games Workshop official tournament. He won that. He went to Six Nations. He won that with his team, and then he went to I think Leicester GT last weekend, and he won that. That's 3 weekends in a row he won, and he knows what he's talking about, Slaves of Darkness. And he appeared on AOS Coach's channel. Shout out to Coach. Fantastic content. And one of the lists that he suggested was a Ravagers list. Archeon, Idolater Lord, Chaos Sorcerer, who was Matt Slanesh, Then it was 2 units of Untamed Beasts, a unit of 30 Splintered Fang, marked Slanesh because of Idolater Lord, so they could run and charge basically as a delivery mechanism. Then 10 Chosen marked Nurgle. I'd probably make them marked Tzeentch for the banner for the forward board against shooting. All in a 1-drop. Boom, done. Now I'm painting my way through that. I'm going to do an episode where I look at like Slaves to Darkness in more detail and kind of take a look at what I could potentially change from that. But that's what I'm initially building towards, because I'm over this idea of not net listing. I'm over this idea of wanting to take ownership over list construction and feeling like I need to win my way by playing my armies. If I want a realistic shot of making Team England, I need to swallow my pride and just play a good army and get good with it. So we'll look at that soon. And I'll take you into my journey with Slaves to Darkness. But that's going to be it for today's episode. I want to apologize once again for taking so long to produce this content. Hopefully I will have another episode for you next week. You can subscribe to me if you're enjoying this content, by all means. You can check me out on Twitter at LRUK or at FanWargaming. I also write weekly competitive articles for Goonhammer.com. It's competitive innovations in the mortal realms. Each week I take a look at top tournament performing lists for that week, pick them apart, tell you what worked, tell you what I find interesting about them. It's a really good resource for people who want to get familiar with what is working on the tournament scene, and you can take those lessons away in your own list building, or simply just copy their lists. Sometimes that's all it takes. But I've been babbling on enough. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time.